Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The human form of life is meant for God realization. But this process, which begins with Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, hearing and chanting of the holy names of the Lord, is disturbed as long as our senses are materially attracted. Therefore, devotional service means purifying the senses. In the conditioned state, our senses are covered by material sense gratification, and as long one is not trained in purifying the senses, one cannot become a devotee. In our Krishna consciousness movement, therefore, we advise from the very beginning that one restrict the activities of the senses, especially the tongue, which is described by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur as the most greedy and unconquerable. To stop this attraction of the tongue, one is authoritatively advised not to accept meat or similar uneatable things, nor to allow the tongue to hanker to drink or smoke. Even the drinking of tea and coffee is not permitted. Similarly, the genitals must be restricted from illicit sex. Without such restraint of the senses, one cannot make advancement in Krishna consciousness. The only method of controlling the senses is to chant and hear the holy name of the Lord. Otherwise, one will always be disturbed, as a householder with more than one wife would be disturbed by them for sense gratification. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Katamayam Datati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Opesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhuba Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. So I'd like to seek all the blessings of all the devotees before I begin my first Bhagavatam class. I feel unqualified to be here, but nevertheless I'll try and speak something quite meaningful. So last year I was staying in India for 4 months, preparing for a service I had to do when I got back, and I was staying in a very remote part of the world, a remote part of India, which is known as Wada. So Wada is a farm community affiliated with the Chowpatty temple, miles away from human civilization. It's about 3-4 hours away from Bombay, surrounded by very small remote villages, surrounded by a huge mountain range, and it was a very mode of goodness sort of lifestyle. The devotees there had many cows. They were fully dependent on to plow the land, the bulls. From the cow dung they use the products for bathing, for toothpaste. Everything was very natural. I remember once when it was raining even, towards the end of the monsoon season, the devotees took me to the top of the temple, and on the roof we were holding cups filled up with rainwater and just drinking the rainwater because the water there was so pure and clean. Very mode of goodness lifestyle. So when I was there, I was reflecting on just how conducive one's environment is to practice spiritual life. If the environment is in a mode of goodness sort of setting, then spiritual life becomes a lot easier to perform. And then I was comparing being at that farm to living in London. Going out on books when I was in Oxford Street, going out on books in all the big cities across England. and how difficult sometimes spiritual life can be to practice in such an environment. So in the Ramayana, Valmiki Muni makes a very interesting comparison when he's describing Ayodhya and he's describing Lanka. When he's describing Lanka, which was the abode of Ravan, he was using words like descriptions regarding the buildings, how big and opulent the buildings were in Lanka. He was describing how much opulence there was in Lanka, how much gold and wealth and so many valuable gems and jewels were there in Lanka. He was describing how Lanka had so many resources for sense gratification, so many facilities for material enjoyment. But then when he describes Ayodhya, he doesn't describe it in terms of the buildings Ayodhya had. He described it in terms of the people of Ayodhya. He didn't describe Ayodhya in terms of opulence, but the qualities of the people of Ayodhya. He didn't describe Ayodhya with resources they had for sense gratification, but the principles the people lived their life by and the devotion they had for the Supreme Lord. A very interesting contrast, I felt. I just wanted to read something which I got on an email quite a few years ago. Somehow I kept it, and I thought it was very interesting to show the stark contrast between Ayodhya and Lanka. So this was something someone sent me. It goes, is entitled The Paradox of Life. It says, we have taller buildings but shorter tempers. We have wider roads but narrower minds. We are spending more but we have less. We buy more but we enjoy less. We have bigger houses but small families. We have more conveniences but less time. We have more degrees but less sense. We have more knowledge but less judgment. We have more experts but less solutions. We have more medicines but less well-being. We have multiplied possessions but reduced our values. We don't love so much but we hate too often. We've learned how to make a living but not a life. We've added years to life but not added life to years. We've traveled to the moon but not to our next door neighbor. We've cleaned up the air but polluted the soul. We've split the atom but not our prejudice. We have higher incomes but lower morals. We're long on quantity but short on quality. These are times of big men but small character. We have steep profits but shallow relationships. These are times of world peace but domestic warfare. We have more leisure but less fun. We have more kinds of food but less nutrition. We have 2 incomes but more divorce. We have fancier houses but broken homes. We have much to show in the window but nothing in the stockroom. So in modern day world that we're living in, what is success generally measured by? In modern day world, success is generally measured by the same things Valmiki Muni was using to describe Lanka. By buildings, economy, facilities for sense gratification, resources, power. These very same things. In fact, it's said that spiritual civilization means subduing one's material desires and increasing one's spiritual desires. And material civilization is the exact opposite. It means subduing one's spiritual desires and provoking one's material desires. And this is what we find is happening here in London right today. Spiritual desires are being subdued, and material desires of every individual are unnecessarily being provoked. The desire to get them to enjoy the senses and become exploited. When I was at Soho Street, one devotee was telling me that simply by walking down Oxford Street, every minute there are 250 impressions that are bombarded on an individual. In terms of sights, in terms of sounds, in terms of smells, his senses are completely bombarded. 250 impressions every single minute. At the manor, we're kind of protected. You know, we have such a mode of goodness environment. But you go outside the front gates and down the road, you see a big poster with a beef burger. McDonald's advertising people to come and enjoy. Like that. So this is the situation we're in. Indriyanam hi charatam yan manonuvitiyate tad asya harati pragyam vayunavam ivambashi. Krishna tells Arjuna that the senses, just as a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, Arjuna, any one of the senses on which the mind starts to focus on will sweep away a man's intelligence. So unfortunately, we do live in a world of consumerism. You know, we often hear this, consumerism and consumers. So I got a definition of what consumerism actually is. And this is what it said. It said, consumerism is a social and economic order that is based on the systematic creation and fostering of a desire to purchase goods and services in ever greater amounts. It's systematic, something which is calculated. And these modern day marketers that, advertise their products are very, very intelligent individuals. They're very expert at in their field. It said that when they have a product and they want to market that product, they do so much research that they know what type of food the people eat. They even know what time roughly you go to bed every single day. They know what sort of jobs you're working in. They know what sort of lifestyle you have. And with all this information they collect, they market their product so it appeals to the individual. And so they go and purchase it. And because people have no control over the senses as it is, they're severely exploited and therefore become more and more entangled and degraded. Once the famous Greek philosopher Socrates was walking in a marketplace in Greece, and he came across a huge stall one individual had. And he stopped in his way and he was just looking at all the items this person was selling. There are many different items. So 5 minutes go by, 15 minutes go by, half an hour goes by, and the shopkeeper is thinking to himself that, this guy's just looking, but he's not buying anything. So he goes over to speak to Socrates and he goes, "Are you okay? Can I help you? Would you like anything?" And Socrates says, "I'm fine." He says, "The more I stand here and the more I'm looking at all the things you have in your shop here," he goes, "the more I realize, actually, I don't really need any of it." So the senses are just bombarded by a relentless onslaught just to get people to buy, as Prabhupada would say, unnecessary necessities. They're necessities, but they're unnecessary at the same time. 95% of which we probably don't even need, and therefore we just get more and more entangled. I was thinking, every January after the Christmas period, you have something known as the January sales. And January sales is crazy in the shopping centres. But it gets so bad, this desire to want to buy things that they don't really need gets so bad that every single year you see that people are so hell-bent in being the first to get these sales and get the bargains that they start to camp outside the shops. You've seen it on the news, people who have perfectly fine homes to go to, they take their children, they take their family, they put up a tent and they camp on the street outside of a shop eating beans from a can because they want to be the first to get into the shop and buy things. There's a whole phenomena of window shopping. So window shopping is interesting. What happens is that individuals don't really have enough money to buy anything. So what they do, they go around shop to shop looking through the window saying, if I did have money, I would buy this. Or this pair of shoes look very nice. If I had the money, I would get something like that. Oh, this would suit you, that would suit you, like this. And they spend their whole day window shopping, although they can't actually physically buy anything. So we can see how these uncontrolled senses are being very severely exploited by very intelligent people. And as a result, people have got themselves into a big mess. This is the world of the cheaters and the cheated, the exploiters and the exploited. Sridhar Swami, the great commentator on the Bhagavatam, gave a very nice example of what happens to people if they don't control these senses that Prahlad Maharaj is talking about. He says, the bee is a victim of his sense of smell. It's hovering around and it smells a nice flower and it goes to take the nectar from that flower. But he doesn't realize that this flower is like, sometimes you get these poisonous Venus flytraps and so many other things. And it gets consumed by the flower and loses its life. He said the male elephants are victims of sex desire. What happens is that the hunters, they take a female elephant with them on hunting. And the male elephant becomes attracted, so he goes running to the female elephant. But what they do, they put a camouflage pit just before the lady elephant. So as the elephant comes, he gets caught and trapped. He said, deers are victims of the sense of sound through the ears. So when hunters go hunting, they have something called a deer call. So it's like a special horn that they blow that attracts the mind of a deer, and the deer comes running. And as a result, it gets caught. He said, fish are victims of the sense of taste when they see the bait on the fisherman's hook. And he said, moths are victims of the sense of sight. They get consumed by the very flames they're initially attracted to. So just like when Hanuman crossed over the ocean and landed in Lanka, we have to execute the order of Guru and Gauranga and go visit all the mini Lankas that we're surrounded by, to reclaim the fallen conditioned soul. So as preachers, as devotees, we go out on book distribution, we go out on Harinams, we go out to so many different programs out there in the material world. Our senses also come under attack. It's not like we're immune from this. I remember last year we were on the marathon, and we were in Leicester. And it was really cold, and, the markets are there, and everyone's, it's so hectic. And when we got there, I was next to a market, and the man was selling dead ostrich meat in burgers. And the smell, I've never, you've heard of, pork and all these things, but ostrich meat, didn't really think people ate ostriches. So what happened is that the smell was so disgusting that I moved to the other side of the road. But because it was so cold and the wind was blowing everywhere, the wind would just blow the smell everywhere, and you couldn't get away from it. So we're smelling so many smells, we're seeing so many dazzling lights, and we're meeting so many different types of people. Our senses are also completely come under attack from this onslaught. Therefore, it's very important that we know what we can do as preachers to protect ourselves, so we don't fall victim to the senses, so we don't end up in an embarrassing situation. And therefore, there are 3 defense strategies we can adopt to help us control the senses. And not become victim to the systematic onslaught that we see around us. And the first of these defense strategies is to regulate the senses. It's quite simple. As long as we have a nose, the nose will have to smell things. As long as we have a tongue, it will have to speak. As long as we have ears, they will have to listen. There's no denying that. Therefore, one extreme is to completely outrightly enjoy the senses, like the moth and the deer, and get consumed. But the other extreme, as devotees, sometimes we try to artificially subdue the senses. You're very hungry and someone gives you some prasadam, like, no Prabhu, I'm fasting today, or, I'll just take a little handful. We try to artificially subdue the senses. So therefore Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that a yogi is one who doesn't eat too much, but doesn't eat too little. In other words, he's balanced in his lifestyle. We dovetail everything. The sense of smell, we dovetail to smelling fragrances offered to the Lord. The sense of eating, we dovetail by taking prasadam. In fact, I was reading Bhakti Siddhanta, in his day was preaching to very elite people in society. And one of the people he was preaching to was a very famous freedom fighter of India known as Subhash Chandra Bose, a Bengali freedom fighter. And so Subhash Chandra Bose's father was Janakinath Chandra Bose. And so Bhakti Siddhanta was speaking and preaching to him. And one of the problems he found with very elite Bengalis at that time was that they were completely hooked on eating meat. They just couldn't give up meat. And so what Bhakti Siddhanta said to Janakinath Chandra Bose was that you give up taking meat and I will personally send for you every day Mahaprasadam from the Gaudiya Mat delivered to your house. And so this Janakinath Chandra Bose agreed. He goes, I'll give up meat, you just send prasadam. So for 10 whole years, every single day, Bhakti Siddhanta would arrange that Mahaprasadam be sent to Janakinath Chandra Bose, his house, personally. For 10 full years. So the idea is that the tongue will have to eat. Therefore, we just engage everything in Krishna consciousness. We have to hear. So therefore, we hear Krishna Katha and so forth. They said that when I was in London, staying at Soho Street, a devotee said, he goes, you're very lucky at the manor. He said, the reason why you're lucky is that if you fall down at the manor, the worst you can do is go to the bakery and have a cake. You know, can't do anything worse than that. But he goes, here at Soho Street, if your senses go wild and you fall down, he goes, look around. There's endless possibilities of the things you could fall down to. So he goes, you're very lucky. So therefore it's said that sense gratification is very much like salt. You know, if you have too much salt in a preparation, what happens? It's completely ruined. In the same way, if you see people who go out and completely outrightly enjoy the senses, what happens? They ruin their lives. And on the other extreme is that if you have not enough salt in a dish, it's also ruined. It becomes bland and tasteless. So therefore, artificially subduing one's senses, that doesn't work either. So therefore, Krishna consciousness gives a balanced approach by which we can enjoy the senses, regulate the senses, but strictly within the boundaries of Krishna consciousness principles. Because once Srila Prabhupada was walking in Beverly Hills in Los Angeles. And for those of you who don't know, Beverly Hills is a very high-class area where all the big famous Hollywood stars and famous musicians live. Huge properties there. So Bhavananda Prabhu was telling this pastime how he was walking behind Srila Prabhupada on a walk. And Prabhupada was chanting, Bhavananda Prabhu was chanting, and he kept looking around at these huge houses. They were like palaces, he said. You know, the sky was blue, the sun was out, you know, people were there, the huge houses with very posh cars, and the grass was perfectly cut. And he was thinking to himself, wow, you know, what a nice place. And then all of a sudden, Prabhupada stopped. He cleared his throat and went, spat on the driveway of one of these houses. And so Bhavananda Prabhu realized by this, that this is what Prabhupada thinks of all these properties that I was getting bewildered with. And he went on and made the point that the reason why Prabhupada could do that was because he was experiencing such a taste in Krishna consciousness. He was experiencing such a taste in Krishna consciousness that the best that the material world had to offer, Beverly Hills, Prabhupada spat on the driveway. So therefore, the second defense strategy we have in ensuring that our senses don't get the better of us is that we develop a strong taste in our Krishna consciousness. It's said to artificially stop a mischievous child is not the solution. What one has to do is give him a better engagement, and he will automatically stop being naughty. So in the same way, one can stop the mischievous activities of the senses by giving them a better engagement in Krishna consciousness. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasvarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. Krishna tells Arjuna that the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, but this taste for sense objects still remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing this param drishtva, this higher taste, one is fixed in Krishna consciousness. So developing a higher taste in Krishna consciousness naturally means that we won't fall victim to any attack from the material world. Otherwise, if we don't develop this taste and we go on try to artificially suppress the senses, yatatohi apikonteya purushasya vipashtitaha indriyani paramatini hiranti prasabam manaha. Krishna says that the senses are so strong and impetuous that they forcibly carry the mind away, the mind of a man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them. Therefore, simply sense control won't work by itself. We need some positive attraction for Krishna consciousness. And this taste is developed through strong sadhanas, through constant hearing and chanting. You know, we're all looking for taste by our very natures, and there's no denying that. And therefore, if we don't find the taste in Krishna consciousness, ultimately we're going to be looking elsewhere for it instead. So as preachers, it's very, very vital that we develop some sort of attraction and taste in Krishna consciousness. Because when you think about it, what is preaching? Preaching is nothing else but the external manifestation of the happiness a devotee is feeling in his Krishna consciousness. It's just manifesting externally. You know, if we don't really taste Krishna consciousness, then how will we really expect other people to take up to it? You know, we go out on the streets and we say to people, you know, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Well, you look miserable. I mean, it didn't work for me. Maybe it might work for you. You know, our preaching won't be so effective. You know, very nice pastime in the Chaitanya Charitamrita of Maharaj Pratap Rudra. So what happened is that Maharaj Pratap Rudra was trying his best to get the darshan of Mahaprabhu. But Mahaprabhu wouldn't give it to him. And he tried again and again and again, so many different attempts, and every time his attempts were being foiled. So what happened once, he was on his palace and he was speaking to his guru, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And a few days' time, the Rath Yatra festival was going to take place. So as they were speaking, what happened was the devotees from Bengal had all come to Jagannath Puri to be with Mahaprabhu and partake in this Rath Yatra festival. So as they were coming from the horizon, Maharaj Pratap Rudra got completely attracted. And he says to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, says, who are these people? Who are these devotees that are coming? He says, their effulgence is like millions of suns. And they seem like they're very empowered. So Prabhupada writes that a devotee who actually practices Krishna consciousness, he has strong reading, hearing, chanting, becomes purified and becomes very, very powerful. By seeing him, his darshan is so attractive. By hearing him is very powerful. By his association is very inspiring. It becomes heart transforming simply by following this process of sadhana bhakti. Maharaj Pratap Rudra says, he goes, such dancing, such kirtan, he goes, I've never ever seen anything like this in my life. And Prabhupada writes in those purports, he says, at that time Jagannath Puri was like the Mecca for kirtan. All different kirtaniers, all different kirtan groups from all over the world will come to Jagannath Puri for the Rath Yatra festival. And Maharaj Pratap Rudra being the king, he would have seen all of them. But Maharaj Pratap Rudra said, I've never seen anything like this before. So Prabhupada says that the devotees of Lord Chaitanya carry a certain potency. And because they're strictly following the rules and regulations, he goes, even the minds of the most powerful men in society can become attracted to Krishna consciousness. In fact, one doesn't even have to think of any innovative preaching ideas of how to make people devotees. He goes, simply the power generated by his strong practice and his taste in Krishna consciousness, one can go out and just chant Hare Krishna on the streets, and automatically people will be attracted. So rather than going out and becoming attracted by the material world, rather as devotees, by controlling our senses, by developing such a strong taste in Krishna consciousness, we can go out and affect the material nature like this. So this is the second strategy that we have. The first was to control the senses, and the second was developing a positive taste, a positive attraction in Krishna consciousness. And finally, the third defense strategy we have to avoid falling victim to this consumerism is that by developing a sound philosophical understanding. When Hanuman got to Lanka, when he first saw Lanka from a distance, he was very impressed. He saw beautiful palaces, all types of material opulence, beautiful people, and he was very impressed at first glance. But when he got behind the walls of Lanka, when he got inside and he saw what was going on there, so many adharmic activities, so many sinful activities were taking place, he really saw Lanka for what it really was. Just like, if someone has a fracture on their arm, like a hairline fracture, it can be very, very painful. But externally, the arm looks fine. It looks like there's nothing wrong with it. So what happens? You go to the hospital. Shishi Radha Gokulananda, Shishi Taram Lakshman Hanuman, Shishi Gaunitai Ki. So one goes to the hospital and he has to get an X-ray scan. And the X-ray scan will reveal all the fractures that are causing so much pain and misery to the individual. So in the same way, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita is just like an X-ray machine. When we're out there in the material world, we see all the glitz and glamour of the material world, all this flashing lights, and it looks quite attractive. We see people having fun, and especially if you're having a bad day, you think, am I really in the right place? And things can seem quite attractive. But when you scan the world through the eyes of the X-ray machine of the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, then you can really see things for how they actually are. That every type of happiness in the world is impregnated by some sort of distress. We have to become Shastra Chakshu, seeing the world through the eyes or the X-ray machines of Shastra. Once Prabhupada said that Krishna consciousness means to see the world how Krishna sees it. So at the end of the third chapter, Arjuna asks Krishna a very interesting question. Atha kena prayukto yam papam charati prushaya aniyachamapi varshnaya balad eva niyojitaha. He says, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to commit sinful activities, even though he doesn't want to, as if some invisible force is impelling him to do these things? And what was Krishna's reply? Very famous shloka. Kama esha krodha esha raj guno samudbhava maha nasho mahapapma vidyam inam iha vairinam. He said is lust only, which is born from the contact of the mode of passion and later transformed into wrath. And it is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. And Prabhupada defines lust as the desire to satisfy one's own senses. The same thing Prahlad Maharaj is talking about in this verse. So therefore we know that this is an enemy that we all have to face. So not only do we have these problems, but Krishna gives us the solution. He gives a solution, and the first thing to engage an enemy, you have to know where the enemy is located. And he gives that knowledge to us. Indriyani mano buddhir asya dishtanam uchite eter vimohayati esha gyan avritya dehinam. That the indriyani, the senses, mano, the mind, and buddhir, the intelligence, are the sitting places of this lust. And through them, lust covers the knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So this is where lust is residing within all of us, through our senses, through our minds, and in our intelligence. So therefore, Krishna says, Evam buddhe param buddhva samstabhyat manam atmanah jahi shatru mahabaho kamarupa durasadam. That knowing oneself to be transcendental to this material mind, senses and intelligence, one should steady the mind with spiritual intelligence, and with his spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So therefore, if we keep our senses under control, keep them fully engaged all the time within the boundaries of Krishna consciousness, if we actually develop some positive attraction, simply, distaste from the material world won't be enough. We have to have some positive taste in Krishna consciousness. And by having a strong philosophical understanding about the danger of sense enjoyment and sense gratification, we can ensure that we'll be sufficiently protected on all sides. We just have to do our part. As one devotee wonderfully told me, he says, when you're out on book distribution, he goes, if you're following the principles of Krishna consciousness properly and sincerely, he goes, then you shouldn't have anything to fear. He goes, because when you're on the street, he goes, above you, the Parampara and Krishna will give you protection. He says, to your left, you have the spiritual master protecting you. To your right, you have Srila Prabhupada protecting you. Below, you have Bhumi Mata protecting you. He goes, on all sides, a devotee is completely protected from this relentless onslaught that we face in the material world. So therefore, we looked at, to conclude, we looked at how environment really affects our ability to practice Krishna consciousness. And unfortunately, we can't go off and hide, in the Himalayas or Wada farm or anything like that. We have to preach in the cities. And therefore, we adopt three measures to protect ourselves. Firstly is controlling the senses by engaging them in Krishna consciousness. Secondly was developing a taste in Krishna consciousness, and we looked at the example of the devotees from Chaitanya Charitamrita, how they were experiencing such a wonderful taste that even the king of Orissa became immediately attracted, and therefore there was no question of them falling down. And finally, by having a strong philosophical understanding, scanning the world through the X-ray machine of the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, to go beyond all the glitz and glamour, to really see things as they are. So thank you all very much for your kind attention.